I'm going to show you about how to window mat your photographs. It's a nice way, especially if you're printing on kind of, high quality paper. It's nice to be able to have them archivally matted as opposed to dry mounted, because that way you can still remove them later from the mat if you change your mind about presentation. So the first step is to have 2 pieces of mat board identically sized, and then to take what's going to be the bottom mat, and this can be kind of a messy one, and figure out where you want it centered. I've gone ahead and measured those marks and made little crosshairs to align my photograph. I have 4-inch borders on the top and sides and a little more on the bottom in this particular case. That's fairly standard. Then to stick it down, we're going to make little tape hinges, and this is a moistening type linen tape. And so the way we work with that is, you could lick it, but this is COVID time, so I'm not gonna lick it. I just have a damp piece of paper towel in this little container here, which I can blot onto the tape to activate the adhesive. You want to get a fair bit on there. I'm finding there's not as much as I thought there was on this paper towel, but get that on there. You can see I made a long, narrow crease. It's going to be stronger this way as a long, narrow crease than if I were to fold it in the shorter direction. Hot dog versus hamburger, right? So fold it like a hot dog. And then we're going to stick that on the back of our print, right there. Now, I mean, really, there's nothing to stop you from just adhering it to the back of the print first and then turning it over. As long as you've got marks made, you know where it's going to go, right? So, sorry about this. Paper sure migrated to that water. But the goal is to have this tape hinge really align with the very top of your paper. You don't want it slid down too far. You want it right along the top margin, because we want this print to simply like hang on the mat. That's the only place it's going to be adhered. It's going to be taped on there. And so the nice thing about it is then mild humidity changes aren't going to mess it up, because it's just hanging. It's not being forced to pull like you would if you had all 4 corners attached. All right, I've got my hot dog aligned pieces of tape on the top, and now I'm just going to dampen the tape on the other side. The reason I do it in 2 steps is just that it's easier to crease the tape when it's not soaking wet. And now I can set it down, slide it up to those registration marks, making sure everything's square, and then kind of press it down into place. And this glue sets up pretty fast. But remember that it is water-soluble glue, so don't expect it to be completely bulletproof, right, for starters. But you can see the end goal is to have a print which, when you open it, it hinges, right? You should have access to the print. And the reason for that is that it's very easy to remove from the mat board without having to flex the print or do any kind of thing that might damage it. Now, I'm going to scoot this. Here we go. So you can see a little better. Now we need to make marks on our top board that will guide us in cutting the window for this. And this is a goofy system that I've kind of devised for this over the years, but it works pretty well. So if this is the front of my mat, like this is the part I want to see as the clean side, set it down. Now open it up like a book, like that. Pull this forward until it's overlapping your photograph, the actual image area, and it's in line side to side with the piece of mat on the bottom. Now, you can make your marks to correspond exactly to where your photo is placed on that board, and that's going to even make up, if you were, say, mounting a darkroom print, maybe it wasn't exactly square in the easel. We're going to custom size this window to fit it. I'm going to give myself, a good bit of breathing room on this print, maybe right about there. What I have here is just a spare piece of mat board that I'm going to use as kind of a little reminder gauge. So if I come out this far, I'll give myself a nice amount of white space around my photo. Make that a little longer so I remember. And so, in other words, the gap from the edge of this is aligned with the photo, not the paper, the photo. And I'm going to make a mark on my mat. And then you see I can move over and use that same gauge here. Edge of the photo, over to here, mark on the mat. All right? You may want to write something there just to keep track that that's the top of the mat. As you get more experience with this, you'll speed up and not need to do that. So now, as you can see, I've closed it like a book. And now I'm going to open it like a book in the opposite direction. And once again, I'm going to pull this up so that it is aligned evenly with the bottom of my photograph and that the left and right sides are even between the two pieces of mat board. I'm going to use my little gauge once again because we're creating extra white space outside of the photo. So I'm going to align the mark with the photo, make a mark here. And so now you can see, I'm going to scoot this up for now. I can just connect these marks, and you don't even have to really go all the way. Lighter marks, of course, leave less graphite to get on your other stuff. Now, remember I had you write top, but so that you remember, now we're closing it. It didn't really matter so much yet if you mounted it really evenly, but now, I bet you're going to guess, open it like a book to the left and slide this up. I'm going to turn it sideways so that I have a nice even view, and I am much more likely to use my gauge accurately, make good marks if I'm looking straight on. There's that one. The bottom one you could opt to make a little bigger for the same reason that we often make the bottom margin of a mat slightly larger. I think I've got a big enough gap right now that I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to open this up in the opposite direction. With this, it's really crucial that the top of the boards align. You know, if the boards are very slightly different in size, it's not too big a deal. But you want the top edge here and here to be even, because this is going to be hinged later, and this piece is going to hang off of that top. I'm going to make my mark right here. Come down, make my mark here. Connect those dots. And now we're going to have a window that is ready for cutting on the mat cutter. Just like that. And it's custom placed to be exactly consistent with where my photo wound up when I was mounting. Whether I really centered it or not, my mat's going to make it look like I centered it because I transferred all those marks directly from the location of the photo. You see, and when it's cut out, it's going to be perfectly aligned. Here's our mat cutter here in room 204. There are two important tools that go with this mat cutter. The mat cutting head actually lives in this little box in my top desk drawer, so please make sure that you keep it there. And there are extra blades located in there if you need to change out the blade in the cutter. I'm going to demonstrate that right now just so you have that in your video for reference. So these guys are kind of stuck together. I'm going to try to not make this a bloody film. There we go. There's sometimes a little bit of oil on these blades because, you know, they want to keep them from rusting, so be sure it's clean. Now, to take this out, I want to first loosen up this little screw. That's going to enable the head to pivot open like that. This flattened screw is a set screw, and it doesn't need to be tight. It's just keeping the blade in there. So you pull the blade out like that, change it over, put another one in, and you'll feel it has a place that it's meant to be. You know, you'll feel how far in it's supposed to be, and there's a back place for it. Again, please don't over tighten this. It is possible to really ratchet this thing down to the point that it damages the threads and all the rest. So it just needs to make the blade not fall out on your stuff. Now, guide it gently in. Notice all the chewed up marks in the aluminum. That's really not necessary. You know, you're going to put it in there one time, and then you're going to turn this back, and what this does is it acts as a stop so that the blade doesn't go too far out, and there is no reason for it to miss and continually dull itself as it hits the edge of that slot going down. So that's the point of this little guy. Now I'm ready to cut. I mentioned when I started this little segment that you needed 2 tools, and I was holding this. This is a tool. This is what we call a backing board. It's really important to use this cutter and any mat cutter with a backing board. The principle at work is that when this blade is cutting through your mat, if there's another piece of mat board behind it to back up that cut, it's going to make it less likely to tear. It's going to make you a cleaner cut. So you're never going to just slap your mat board on there and let the blade push through into this empty channel. You're always going to place just a long strip of mat board up in here. And now you can see the way this system works. This slides on the rail. And as we cut, we're going to push down on this as it's moving, and that's gradually going to form our cut. I'll show you that right now. Here's my window. It's very lightly drawn, just because I don't really want graphite all over the place. But what you want to do is make sure you can see the whole window of what it is you're cutting without the mat cutter arm covering any of it. That's going to ensure that you have it the right way up. All right? If I, in other words, cut this way, see now the mat cutting arm is covering the window, that wouldn't be right. It would cut the bevel in the wrong direction, and now the clean side of my mat would be the back, and the side I've done all this marking on would have to be the front, and that's no good. So we're going to have the narrowest portion, in other words, on the left at all times. The border goes on the left as you align it. I'm just holding this up a little bit so that I can now align my 2 marks that I made earlier for where the edge of the format is. And the format starts and stops here and here. So I'm going to place the cutter up here. And if you notice, there is a cool little mark on there. That mark shows you where the blade's coming in. So because this mat board has a little thickness, I'm actually going to start my cut a tiny bit above, say 1/8 of an inch. And then when I actually continue down, I'm going to continue past by just a little tiny bit. That's going to allow those beveled cuts to meet even on the other side of the mat where it's actually farther. So we'll go ahead and cut now. Start up there, and I just sort of put my hand over it like this and slide down. Just like any other paper or mat cutting application, repeated medium pressure strokes are so much better for creating a nice clean cut than trying to force it through all in one swoop. So just push harder and harder, and you'll start to feel a difference in resistance when you go through. After a while, remember, you'll be cutting into the backing board, which is fine. That's what it's there for. But you'll get a feel for when you're all the way through. So that was all the way through. I'm going to rotate it, put this back down. These blades you can use, you can probably cut 10 mats on one of these blades. But, remember, these blades are not super expensive. We buy them in boxes of 100. And you spend a lot of money on your mat boards. So if you think that blade might be dull, man, treat yourself. Change that blade. You can use each end of the blade, obviously, before it's time to throw it away. There's, if you take the mat cutter out of the box and you can see that maybe someone has set this thing down and nicked the end of the blade so it's no longer a right angle, throw that thing away. Go get yourself another one, or check and see if the other side of the blade happens to be in better shape. That's a good possibility. So we want to have this lined up so you can barely see your marks. This blade comes really, really close to that cutter. It's incredibly accurate. But we do want to be able to see it, just barely. Err on the side of cutting too many times, because that's just going to mean that you're spending a lot of extra time moving your arm up and down. It's not going to hurt anything. Cutting it so that it doesn't go all the way through, on the other hand, can mean that the paper winds up tearing and then makes it look bad. So if you notice, I carefully turned it over, sort of supporting the window within, because I sort of felt like that one little corner was sort of holding out on me. It's not totally cut through. Rather than just pull it and wind up with little mat fuzzies, I'm going to take a spare mat cutter blade, sort of put it into the cut, and you can see it naturally follows the bevel. And then I'm just going to use that as a guide to cut that corner free. You'll get a handle of it. The more you do it, the more you'll get a sense of just how much overcutting you need to do in terms of, starting past that line to get your mat. But there's your window. Next step is to attach it to the photograph. I have my window here, got my photo. This is the easiest, super rewarding part. I am just simply going to align the tops of these mats. I need 2 more sort of 1 to 1.5 inch size pieces of linen tape. I'm going to see if I can show you. See, it's pretty wet. You see that? We really want to soak that glue pretty thoroughly. I think the most common mistake people make with this, they see that, oh, you're supposed to lick it, and they lick it more like like how you'd lick ice cream, like you're trying to get the ice cream into your mouth. What we're doing is sort of glorified spitting, right? If we're licking, we want a good bit of water to dissolve this glue and activate it. So this needs to really be pretty wet. Now, that said, don't let it drip on your photo. And you can see where I've placed these. They are going to actually make the strongest hinge if they're not right out on the edges but actually in a little bit. And again, going hot dog, not hamburger direction. Think about the way hinges on doors look. Now this can just fold down. I can give a little sort of a pinch to the top to form that hinge. And voila, there's my nice matted photograph. of Wine Island. There's an island in that picture. Courtesy of a lot of coastal erosion over the years, it's sort of faint, but this is part of Wine Island right there, that little batch of sand. So now you're ready, and the cool thing about this is if you wanted to sign your work, now you can finally sign the work itself, not the mat, right? The art is here. It's not this. This is the thing that might get replaced later when your work sells to some big collector and they want to make a different size frame. So you would sign your name and the date right here on the actual border of the photo. If there's a title, like Wine Island 2019, you'd maybe write that there. And there you go. You got your beautiful archivally matted artwork.